We know it's been a little bit more than the 3 months we were anticipating between our last meeting in December and this one, but we had some scheduling issues because of the room being renovated, and it's a much more comfortable and useful environment for us, so we're happy the renovations were done, and we're happy you're here to join us. I'd like to start off by asking, is there anyone in the audience that needs Spanish translation?
Yeah, Jesus Cruz. I'm the translator for this morning, and I'm available for anyone that needs translation, be it over the internet or blog, website, or here in person. Yo me llamo Jesús Cruz y esta mañana estoy para traducir y ayudar para toda persona que necesite ayuda en español, traducción en español.
Thank you. For those of you here in the room, a little bit of direction in case you need to use a restroom or leave the building in the event of an emergency. The restrooms are out those rear doors and to the left. And in the event of an emergency, and we did have some burned popcorn on the 11th floor this morning that tripped the alarms, so be prepared. We do exit through the rear doors, turn right, and please take the stairway down. The stairs take them down to the lobby, exit out the front of the building, and we gather in Cesar Chavez Park, which is the large park kitty corner across the intersection. Up here on the dais with me, I have Josh Tooker, who is our Legislative Affairs Director. I have Miriam Ingenito, Chief Deputy Director for the department, and Stuart Black, who is the Deputy Director over our cleanup program. We're having these quarterly public meetings in order to give the public an opportunity to learn more about the department's programs and meet our staff in a forum that is a little bit more relaxed because we're not focused on any particular action. So it gives you an opportunity to have some conversation with us about what we do and how we do it. We also want to give you the opportunity to let us know what your concerns are. Tell us what things you want to hear more about so that we can be more accessible to you and build a relationship so we can have our program be more responsive and more effective going forward. We are going to focus today on our site cleanup program. And that's the program that takes contaminated sites and cleans them up and returns them to beneficial uses for the public. We refer to it as our Brownfields and Environmental Restoration Program. It's got a really unfortunate acronym, BERP, but that is how we refer to it. And so when we talk about that, please understand we are referring to our program and not anything we need to excuse ourselves for. So today we're going to give you an overview of that program's priorities and what the metrics for that program are in 2015. We're going to talk a little bit about what we're doing to protect groundwater because that's something that is much on everyone's minds today. And we're going to be talking about restoring contaminated properties and give you an update on a couple of key cleanup sites. There will be a general public comment period at the end after all the presentations are done. We're going to give you, I think we've got 4 minutes per comment, and we'll adjust that if we have a lot of comments and we need to in order to get everybody in. Anything that we're not able to answer today, we will get back to you as long as you provide us with your contact information. If you want to make a comment, we have comment cards in the back of the room, and we would ask that you please fill them out, one topic per card. This will allow us to group the comments by topic, and that'll make it possible for us to get through more comments more quickly. So please fill out the card if you have a comment, and return them to our staff members. Heather and Molly, can you guys stand up? Wave your hands so we can see. They are not, oh, they're out front. So, Tama, raise your hand. Excellent. Tama will make sure that you are able to turn your cards in and get your questions answered. And for folks online, if you want to send in a question, send it please to DTSC Public Meeting, that's one word, DTSC Public Meeting at dtsc.ca.gov. And you are also able to send questions via Twitter using the hashtag AskDTSC. I would ask that in the first line of your question, you please give us the topic, again, so that we can group the questions by topic. We will first be taking the questions from folks in the room, and then from folks who are participating via email and Twitter, given enough time to get to everybody. We did run out of time last time, and that created some anxiety for folks who had traveled a long way to be here, so we're trying to be respectful of the time of everyone, but especially those who have taken the time to come all the way to Sacramento to meet with us. And I will add that we have heard that people feel it would be helpful if we moved these meetings around some to increase access and also adjust the time of the meeting. We were somewhat constrained in time getting the meeting room today, but we will be thinking about ways to make these forums more accessible to everybody for future meetings. Before we get into the presentations, there are just a couple of things I want to update everybody on that have happened since our last meeting. Many of you are probably aware that the Exide Technologies battery recycling plant in Vernon is closing. And we did let them know last February that, this past February, that we would be denying their application for a hazardous waste permit. And on March 12th, we issued an order that ensures that the facility will be safely closed, that there will be expedited funding for the closure and cleanup of the facility, and we also negotiated an extra down payment on cleanup of the residential community surrounding the facility, and you'll be getting an update on that residential cleanup later today. In addition, just yesterday, our Safer Products and Workplaces program released their priority work plan, and that plan identifies product categories from which we will be identifying priority products over the next 3 years for work on reformulation in cooperation with the industry that manufactures those products. So this is an important program, and we're really excited to have that priority work plan out, and look forward to working with everyone on that successful program in the coming couple of years. Now I'd like to call up Ray LeClaire. He is the division chief, one of the division chiefs in our cleanup program, and he is going to give you an overview of the cleanup program.
I'm Ray LeClaire with the cleanup program. I probably want to clarify that while officially we're the Brownfields Environmental Restoration Program, we're most commonly referred to as just the cleanup program. So in case anyone's confused, we'll clarify that. I'm here this morning to talk, and with several of my colleagues, to talk about our cleanup program. I'll start out with about a 20-minute presentation and overview of our program and highlight some key concepts for cleaning up sites and discuss a few of our new initiatives in improving our processes and cleanups. Then I'll hand over the presentation to Dot Lostrom, who will discuss cost recovery and introduce our staff to discuss some specific projects that will help illustrate how we protect groundwater, protect the public from legacy contamination, and restore sites to beneficial reuse. I want to emphasize that our program is focused on two important goals. One and foremost is protecting the public and the environment by remediating soil, surface water, groundwater, and the air at contaminated sites. Secondly, we want to return contaminated properties into productive reuse. A key goal is many of these sites are located in central urban areas where the need for infill development is important, such as here in downtown Sacramento at the rail yard down the street and at many contaminated sites in Carson that we'll discuss a little later today. Our program has had a huge positive impact on the state by safeguarding communities and helping convert blighted properties into sites of urban renewal. We have also helped clean up and clear thousands of acres of military bases. And here's some of our metrics. We have many metrics, and I chose just a few here so we could go over them. During the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act that was passed by Congress in 2009, we worked closely with our federal partners, and during an 18-month period, we helped create 46,000 temporary and 72,000 permanent jobs. And as far as military facilities, in the last 6 years alone, we've worked with the military to clear nearly 13,000 military acres for reuse and for habitat and for open space. And in the last 10 years, we've worked with local school districts to clear 21,000 classrooms for over 500,000 students. These are the numbers that we're working on right now. Currently, our staff are working on nearly 1,400 cleanup sites. Of that, 259 are sites that have ongoing monitoring activities. 199 are cleanups at formerly permitted sites and permitted sites. And then we have 3 legacy landfills. These legacy landfills are older landfills where the owner or operator are bankrupt and the state and federal government has had to step in to close and maintain these legacies of our recent past. In the case of Stringfellow, DTSC is lead for the cleanup for the state of California, completing closure, capturing and treating the contaminated groundwater, and maintaining cover and leachate systems. It's a major responsibility. Here's a background on environmental programs overall. The evolution of environmental programs in California and the United States are often linked to and in response to very public events. Changes in public's thinking and will often lead to law and government action. I think we can name a few here. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring in 1962, the Cayuga River fire near Cleveland in 1969. And following these major events and others, enacted the government, really helped make the government take action with passing of RCRA in 1976, CERCLA, the Superfund law in 1980, and other major laws that we are now enforcing and helping to clean up the environment. We are primarily a field organization where our staff work with local governments, state offices, community members, and RPs to get the sites cleaned up. And be able to do this effectively, we have to have our state distributed throughout the state so that we can more effectively work with locals and the responsible parties and take important enforcement actions. I want to emphasize, I've worked at DTSC for over 25 years, and every day I'm impressed with the knowledge and dedication of our staff in protecting human health and interacting with the public. Here's our org chart. Our program is comprised of 8 operational branches, 3 technical support branches, and 1 grant and program support branch. We're made up of scientists, engineers, geologists, toxicologists, and administrative professionals. It's a diverse mixture of expertise. It can be a challenge to manage this type of diversity, but it's really the cornerstone of our strength and allows us to make robust decisions and have creative problem solving. We refer to ourselves as the one-site cleanup. That means we manage many different types of cleanup authorizations and different laws. Let's go hit the laser pointer. I don't know if it'll work for those online. We have the Resource Recovery and Conservation Act. We have federal Superfund that we oversee. We have the state Superfund laws. We have brownfields, primarily a voluntary cleanup program, and we have federal facilities, which comprise mainly military bases in the state with a few DOE sites. While these are all very different authorizations and different laws, we really work on one cleanup process with more similarities than there are differences between the laws in terms of the technical cleanup at these sites. This slide has the specific steps for the California State Superfund cleanup, but this process can really be applied to the vast majority of our sites. We start out with site discovery. Discovery of sites can happen through complaints through the public, referrals by other agencies, and our own discovery work, where we look at old site plans and other ways to find some of these old industrial sites. At this stage, we begin to engage with the public and try to understand what the community's needs are and knowledge of the facility so that we can, we're able to effectively communicate and get input from the public. And as we go through our investigation and feasibility process to know more about the site and how best to clean it up, it's important that we engage with both the local governments and the community. And so this investigation is where we go out and collect samples, oversee work, and get at the best way to clean up these sites. And I'll get into that in a little more detail. Then we come up with a draft decision, and in our draft CEQA document, here where we have a very focused and engaged public outreach and draft period where we listen to the public, go through major outreach, and accept lots of input. With our draft document, we take all that in, and then we make a final decision. Then we complete our final design, and then we construct. Then we have certification, and then in some cases we'll have operation and maintenance. And I'll discuss that in a couple more slides. At the center of our project team for cleanup is the project manager that's responsible for managing all aspects of the project. We also count on support from our geologic services, our engineering services, our toxicologists. Within our program, outside our program, we rely on public participation for public outreach. We rely on our administrative programs to help with contracting and fiscal issues, and then we rely on our attorneys and our CEQA office to help us with those processes. Next, I'm going to touch on several important concepts that are part of cleaning up sites. And a key part of that is assessing risk. This slide is a general outline of how we assess risk. This outline applies to establishing PRGs, but it's a nearly identical process for how we establish site-specific risk. And what we closely examine is how a particular chemical can impact people through the air, water, and soil. We also look carefully at human activities and how a person can be exposed and quantify that exposure. This slide illustrates the CERCLA decision-making process, that is the federal Superfund decision-making process, which is used to make decisions about cleanup levels and methods used to achieve them, that is the implementation of cleanup. This is the federal process, and a significant difference is that we look carefully, when you look over here, which is, whoops, wrong button there, sorry about that. Whoops, there we go, is that state acceptance and community acceptance is officially late in the process. With the state, we look at how the locals feel about a site and the cleanup style and how we do that, and community acceptance very early in our process, so that even in our investigation and feasibility stage, we have a good understanding of what the public understands and expects about a site. Getting back to this is often referred to as the 9 criteria, and it's broken into threshold criteria, and that's really sort of the bottom line for a cleanup, which is the cleanup going to be protective of human health and the environment, and does it follow the law? So any cleanup that we do must meet that criteria. Then we move into the other criteria which help our decision-making process. We call it, that's referred to as a balancing criteria. How easy is it to implement? Short-term effectiveness, long-term effectiveness, overall risk reduction. So these items help us in our decision-making process, in contrast to what we would call the threshold criteria, which are absolutely essential, and they're not things that we really are able to be flexible with. And obviously we have the local communities and local governments involved in this process all along. And I want to establish a concept here. At some sites, we can complete the cleanup to what we call residential standards. That is, there's no restriction on future reuse of the property. This is DTSC's preference at sites where we are able to, impact that preference. In general, though, that is a local land use control entity's decision. In other cases, site cleanup will require ongoing responsibility by the responsible party with oversight by DTSC. We refer to this as long-term stewardship. This is a picture of a site called Iron Mountain Mine outside Reading, and it's clearly a site that is going to require long-term stewardship. So in terms of remedies with long-term stewardship, they kind of fall into two major categories for us. Those that require a lot of active operation and maintenance, which is what you can see in front of you, and then other sites that really require a land use restriction only, and I'll be discussing that here. For sites with operation and maintenance, we can look at these in three different ways. There's sites that have operation and maintenance, what we would call short-term, which is less than 10 years. And an example of this would be a small site where there's a dry cleaner and there are solvents in the soil, and we can implement a remedy there that would take less than 10 years to implement, and we would be done with the site. A site that we would consider to be mid-length would be a groundwater cleanup, taking many decades, but we would have an endpoint in sight, the goal being, restoration of the groundwater, but would take many decades to implement. The last category are ones that we would call in perpetuity, which would be sites that we'll need to operate and maintain forever. These sites, examples of these sites would be acid mine drainage sites, where the drainage and the effects of the old mining would essentially go on forever. And then hazardous waste landfills, where the cover systems and the leach extraction and collection systems will need to be maintained forever. For land use restrictions, this is a picture of Emeryville. There's a number of industrial sites in Emeryville, and Emeryville was very aggressive in redeveloping this area, and we worked closely in partnership with them. And these sites are old industrial facilities where the future reuse will be commercial or industrial, as dictated by the local land use authority. An example is here in front of us is IKEA in Emeryville. This old industrial area was converted to an IKEA warehouse. I'll point out here, and the associated parking structure and other redevelopment. The cleanup was tailored for commercial reuse and would not be suitable for unrestricted residential development. In this case, the owner does not need to operate any equipment, but does need to keep the current barrier in place to prevent exposure of people to the soil that's underneath through deed restrictions and covenants. I'm going to cover a little bit on financial aspects of cleanups. The vast majority of our sites are cleanups where the responsible parties are responsible for conducting the activities. We refer to this as responsible party cleanups with DTSC oversight. Our staff are involved in monitoring the activities in the field, review of their work plans and investigations, reviews of their analyses, taking samples in the field to ensure that the RPs are doing accurate work, review of their subsequent results, and we will, in all cases, write decision documents, and at the same time working very closely with the communities. In some cases, there is no responsible party to conduct the cleanup, and the state and federal government has to step in to control the risk and in some cases restore the site. There's both a federal Superfund and what's also referred to as a California Superfund, which is a California State Response Act. Obviously, the federal government has a much larger pot of money than the state and has a very significant role in orphan sites through this federal Superfund. In Superfund, EPA pays for the discovery, investigation, and decision-making for these sites. The state must pay for 10% of construction for the remedies and 100% of the long-term operation and maintenance. In addition to Superfund obligations, we use the state response account, or the state Superfund, for state sites that are often smaller. We look at these sites to reduce or prevent risk. An example would be a dry cleaner site where solvents are in the soil, that can move into adjacent homes. We will often go in to try to intercept these vapors from migrating so that we can protect the local residents. That's why these funds, we believe, are very, very critical. Here's some projections about our account. I think what's important here is to begin with the red line. It's the fairly flat line. That represents our state response account, funding and projections into the future. The next line to look at is the yellow line, and that is the total need. And as you can see, there's always been a gap, but what's really disturbing here is you can see that gap grows greatly into the future. And to better understand that, we look at the blue line, which is the MPL, the federal Superfund demand line. This represents what we need to do to match 10% construction and pay for operation and maintenance into the future. You can see that our state response account will be completely exhausted by just the MPL Superfund match alone by 16-17, and after that we won't have enough money even in the account to cover matching federal Superfund into the future. And obviously our ability to get at small sites and reduce risk in communities will diminish greatly and be eliminated completely by 16 and 17. Next, I'm going to talk about some initiatives in the site cleanup program to improve parts of our program, and it fits within the overall Fixing the Foundation initiative for the whole department. We call this financial assurance, and we're going to try to improve our program. The goal of financial assurance is to have the polluter pay for cleanup. It's a simple concept. We need to make sure that these funds, and in financial assurance, we need to make sure these funds are available for the cleanup and the ongoing operation and maintenance if the RP goes into bankruptcy or otherwise fails to implement the needed protections. In the cleanup program, our goal was to look very, very carefully at the financial obligations, make proper and complete estimates, and we've been able to do that and be 40% complete by December of 14, with a goal of being 95% complete by 2015. Our next initiative is enforcement and cleanup. The goal here is to take quick and effective enforcement action at cleanup sites where responsible parties underperform during cleanup. We've already improved enforcement actions at the cleanup program by monitoring underperforming cleanups more carefully and taking action more quickly and more effectively. As part of this effort, we've identified sites that have failed to meet goals, and we call these Priority 1 sites. These sites have failed to meet goals, and we've taken swift enforcement action at these sites and taken sanctions against the sites that have failed to perform. We've also created what we call a watch list, where progress at cleanup sites is slow and the work does not meet expectations. In this case, we establish clear and enforceable goals with expectations and a clear path towards compliance or a path towards enforcement and penalties. We've also established best practices for enforcement and we're revising our enforcement guidance to reflect these goals. What we are really working very hard to is not have sites stuck without a plan forward. Environmental justice is a very high priority for DTSC and also the cleanup program. Over the last several years, we've focused our discovery activities in areas where there's an overall high environmental burden. And over the last 2 years, we've used OHIA's CalEnviro screen tool to help focus our activities in the areas of highest need, to be able to identify contaminated sites and get them into our process to get them cleaned up to protect communities. We're also improving our community engagement, listening to communities carefully about the sites in their neighborhoods, working with local agencies and air districts to be sure our limited resources are used in areas and on the most important sites. And here I'll turn the presentation over to Dot Lostrom.
Dot is the other division chief in the cleanup program, and I'd also like to introduce Dr. Meredith Williams, who has just joined us a little bit ago. She is one of our deputy directors in DTSC. She is in charge of our Safer Products and Workplaces program. And it occurred to me that I failed to introduce myself at the beginning, so just for the record, my name is Barbara Lee, and I'm the director of the department. Go ahead, Dot. Thank you.
Back. As Ray was discussing, Fix the Foundation is the name we've given to the self-analysis that we started 2 or 3 years ago. And as we started looking critically at who we are and what we do, cost recovery rose to the surface right away. Over the years, since the inception of DTSC, we've spent nearly $2 billion on cleanups of sites. We provide the oversight. The RP does the work, but we provide the oversight. And as Ray mentioned, our fundamental precept is that the polluter pays. The taxpayer doesn't pay for our oversight. The polluter does. But as we began looking and deeper into our own work, we realized that although we had done a good job with about 90% of collecting the costs that we had incurred, there was about 10% still that needed to be resolved, 10% or so that was unaccounted for. So we did what we do. We started a deep analysis of exactly what went wrong and how could we fix it. And we focused on first, what was the process? And we created flow charts, and we got work groups together, and we analyzed it down to the tiniest steps, and then we memorialized these in a group of instructions that we call Departmental Procedure Memoranda. We rarely actually say that, we say DPMs, because as you all know, we love our acronyms. But we memorialized the steps, and even more importantly than the steps, we assigned a role and we assigned a responsibility for every single person who touches any part of cost recovery. And in doing that, we set up a series of checks and balances so that if it slips through the crack by one person, there's someone else who is watching it, who's monitoring it, who's following it. Another thing we did is we set up a new category of staff, and we call this new person the Administrative Project Manager. The Administrative Project Manager works side by side with the Technical Project Manager. The Technical Project Manager will focus on the cleanup, on protecting human health and the environment, and then the Admin Project Manager takes away that burden of all the administrative stuff, including cost recovery. So what we did is we expanded our team, and now we have not just a technical project manager, but an administrative project manager, very important part of the full team. We've made a lot of progress in the past year and a half, 2 years since we've been doing this work. I could go on for several slides. I could talk about how we prioritized using the statutes of limitations. I could talk about letters where we have a log, our collection letter set up, and we have a log, and you go in every week and you check that log. I could go on and on about it because we've made such tremendous progress. We still have about a year left that we're focusing on the backlog that we need to address, but that's not our only focus. Our other focus is to put in these procedures and to be able to ensure with absolute confidence, with absolute commitment, that we will never be in this situation again. And that's what we could all give that promise to you today. And with that, I'm going to move on to the major part of our program, which is having the cleanup staff come up and talk to you about the work they're doing. As Ray said, we've divided this into three categories, and the first category is protecting groundwater. We have two staff, two senior engineering geologists who are going to give this presentation for you. The first one is Rick Fears. I've been working with Rick for a few years, and I can tell you he is a true visionary when it comes to groundwater. I am inspired every time I listen to him. He's going to talk to you about a new computer tool he developed that's being used that can causing quite a bit of excitement. I shouldn't just say he developed, he along with others, but I will tell you that the vision came from him. The second speaker following Rick will be Dr. Kate Berger. And Dr. Berger is in charge with the remediation of the San Gabriel Basin. And she's going to talk to you about Whittier Narrows, which is the keystone of the remediation project. And with that, I'll turn it over to Rick.
Okay. So I'm going to be talking about the Spatial Prioritization Geographic Information tool that we developed at the Department of Toxic Substances Control. And this acronym, because I hate acronyms, but I work for the government, so we got to use them. But we developed an acronym that kind of made some sense, and it's called the SPGIT. And the SPGIT is a good acronym for what we're doing, because it's really about using data to help us find new sites and protect groundwater at the same time. We all love our drinking water, and we need it dearly. So we're going to talk a little bit about drinking water and how we get that and who's responsible for that and how DTSC interacts with those responsibilities. So the State Water Resources Control Board has a drinking water program that, and they monitor the wells, and they contain a database, and they make sure that people are drinking safe water. And you know, in my experience, they do a great job of that. The Department of Toxic Substances Control is responsible for, you know, both soil and groundwater cleanup, and that groundwater cleanup and that soil contamination can create a link between drinking water wells. So DTSC is, you know, we developed this spigot as a response to disproportionately impacted communities, and we see this as a way to help them while we're doing our mission and while we're protecting our drinking water supply. So that's kind of the purpose of the spigot and what it means to us. Now I'm going to talk about, you know, kind of the nuts and bolts of the spigot system here. And basically what it involves is 4 data sets. The first data set deals with health risk, and it's really taking the drinking water supply data that we get from now the Water Board and bringing that into a way that electronically we can look at it, examine it, and move it forward. And so what we do is we take impacted drinking water wells that exceed the drinking water standards because they're contaminated, and we identify those wells and we group them and cluster them and provide that information as part of our tool. The next one we look at are the generator density. So basically we're looking at industrial areas, places that have more generators and more industrial contaminants are places that are more likely to create problems for us as in the cleanup program. And so we look at those. The following one is the OEHA CalEnviroScreen. OEHA has done some incredible work with putting together a lot of data. And so we've incorporated that work into our spigot process, and it helps us you know, focus on communities that have been disproportionately impacted. And so we use that as one of our criteria. And the last one is kind of it's a little different, but we take how much work the Cal EPA or the US EPA have completed in each of our spigot areas, and we sum that up, and so these things are all just you know, pretty much simple math is putting them together, and then we add them together and we come up with values. Now getting back to the planet Earth, and you know, our picture here shows that. We're looking at the LA Central Groundwater Basin, and the bubbles represent the amount of impact in each of the drinking water wells. So it looks like a big balloon map, but this is the way we can look at the data in our spigot process. And we had these clusters of wells that we identified in the real world when we started looking at the data. And we needed a mechanism to put those clusters together. The color that's represented on the symbols are also the chemistry of the data. So in some ways, the data has a fingerprint that we can look at, and we can use that to help us in our cause with this data set. So the same picture with the SPGIT process over the top of it. And so each of those boxes in the SPGIT process is slightly larger than 1 square mile. And that helps us because the drinking water data is protected as far as location for homeland security purposes. So we use that data and I'm showing it here, but there are no streets or anything that you can locate it with. But the reality is that data represents what we wanted to capture. And so we created the boxes. We summed up the 4 criteria that we talked about in the previous slide in each of those boxes. And then we came up with a value for each box. So there's a ranking system for these boxes. So we can say, hey, box 1 is the worst box in the state of California. Well, the good news is that's in San Fernando Valley Superfund site, and we're already dealing with it. Box 2, San Gabriel Superfund site. And it goes on, and we can look at each of these boxes, and we can find the worst one that we're not doing something about, which is really important to our program. Get on the right slide here. So then, we kind of get into this thing where we've defined something that we think we can use to help us find new sites, but the next thing is, how do we really do that? And how do we do that with the limited funding that the department has to do these kinds of things? So we look at collaboration. So our stakeholders in the SPGIT process are, the LA Groundwater Convening is working with us. And within that program, we're working with the US EPA, the USGS, the Water Replenishment District, the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and the State Board. We both work with the State Board through their drinking water program, and we make sure that we are coordinated with all these parties and that we're working towards a viable way to use all this information and data for these bigger regional sized projects. In the case of the LA Groundwater Convening, we decided that our best approach with this would be to start off with a pilot, and then we could work our way out from there, develop a methodology that works for everybody, and that we can standardize our process, and then we can move it, and show success there, and we can move it to other places in the state. There are 492 of those SPGIT areas in the state of California, so it's fairly significant. Each one of those is a square mile or slightly larger, but that's our current data. That's what it shows us, and that could change over time. But generally, if we see contamination in a drinking water well, we try to keep that data because it shows us that there's been a release somewhere. So on this slide, we have the contaminated drinking water wells again shown in those circles, and then we have our area that we've selected. But what we've done on this slide is we've also put the existing plumes and work that people have done in the area. So with our SPGIT process, we say, hey, there's an existing site here, and it might be impacting a well. We look at that, but also we look for, hey, there's a well here that's impacted, and this is the really important and new part, is there's a well here that's impacted and we don't have any sites for it. So with our SPGIT process, we can identify those areas and really focus on that and move those into our cleanup program type process. So, we're pretty excited about this because it's the first time that we've really had the ability to put these different data sets together to tell us a story to use as leverage for us to find new sites. In the past, and we've done great work at the DTSC in cleaning up sites, but this way we get a little better vision, And so we can use that vision to help us into the future. And that's the excitement about this process and what we're doing with it. And with that, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Dr. Kate Berger, and she's going to talk about groundwater protection in the San Gabriel Valley.
Thank you, Rick. Good morning, everybody. So we're going to transition now to a presentation that's talking about a very mature groundwater cleanup effort that's going on in the San Gabriel Valley. We're 3 decades into the effort. This valley is located about 10 miles east of downtown Los Angeles. The extent of the groundwater basin is shown in green on the slide, surrounded by the San Gabriel Mountains and lower lying bedrock hills. All of the surface water and groundwater in the basin flows generally southward and exits through a gap in the bedrock hills called Whittier Narrows. The water moving through Whittier Narrows enters the central groundwater basin that Rick was just talking about. So the cleanup activities going on in the San Gabriel Basin are crucial because the people living and working in this valley rely on groundwater for the majority of their drinking water supply. And in addition, if contamination does move through Whittier Narrows, it's going to affect the drinking water supply for others in the Los Angeles area. So the San Gabriel Valley was primarily agricultural until approximately the onset of World War II. And at that time, it saw rapid industrialization. And unfortunately, that also coincided with the time where you see the use of chlorinated solvents. And we know that in the initial decades of their use, there were very poor management practices. They were often discharged to ground or otherwise poorly managed. So you imagine a myriad of releases to ground over decades. And eventually that contamination made its way to groundwater. The first impacts to water supply wells were recognized in 1979, and additional investigation identified quite extensive contamination. So just for context, the largest plume you see in the Baldwin Park area is approximately 8 miles long, 1 mile wide, and in places it's 1,000 feet deep. So in 1984, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency added 4 areas of regional groundwater contamination to the national priorities list. And these sites are referred to as the San Gabriel Valley Superfund sites, areas 1 through 4. So the U.S. EPA and state agencies, as well as local stakeholders, have been working on the cleanup since that time. So currently, EPA has 6 active areas, focus areas for the groundwater cleanup activities in the valley. These are referred to as operable units. So in the center of the slide, El Monte, South El Monte, and Whittier Narrows operable units all make up the Area 1 Superfund site. The Baldwin Park operable unit makes up the Area 2 Superfund site. We have the Area 3 operable unit, and then finally the Puente Valley operable unit, which makes up the Area 4 Superfund site. There are a lot of parties involved with these cleanups. The U.S. EPA is primarily involved with the Superfund site cleanups, but they're also involved in some site-specific efforts as well. So for example, recently the department requested their assistance for an emergency response action associated with a dry cleaner in the city of El Monte. So DTSC and the Los Angeles Regional Water Quality Control Board have been working on the cleanups, as I said, since the mid-'80s. Both in support of EPA Superfund efforts, but also on site-specific cleanups. They're shown in the same bubble here, even though we're different videos, because we're working on the same function. We're working on groundwater cleanup activities, site cleanup activities. So some of the local stakeholders involved include the San Gabriel Basin Water Master, San Gabriel Basin Water Quality Authority, local governments, responsible parties, and water entities. And in many cases, these parties are actually implementing and managing some of EPA Superfund remedies. And in addition, they have other projects that are not related to the Superfund efforts. For example, there are some water systems that need treatment on them, so they have wellhead treatment and other projects. The Water Quality Authority is actually working on a source removal effort, trying to protect some water supply wells in the area. Local government contributions could be, permitting process. To run these projects, you do need the ability to discharge some water to surface water at times. That requires a permit. In some instances, they're contributing their pumping rights for us to be able to operate the remedy. Community acceptance is vitally important to these projects, whether it's being conducted on the federal, state, or local level. So there have been a lot of outreach to the community over the decades, frequent workshops, particularly offered by the local agencies. In addition, fact sheets, EPA provides cleanup progress fact sheets to the community about every 2 years. And in addition, if there's a specific function going on a project, there will be a fact sheet issued for that as well. So as you can imagine, getting all these parties working together can be quite challenging when you have so many people involved. There's a lot of coordination that goes on. So EPA's approach to their Superfund remedies, it's a regional scale effort through use of groundwater extraction and treatment systems to capture and control the plumes. Extracted groundwater is treated to safe levels and, if feasible, reused as drinking water. And the photos you see on this slide is just examples of some of the infrastructure that's required for these projects. So there are a lot of different contaminant types that you find in the San Gabriel Valley groundwater that need to be addressed as part of the cleanup process. So for simpler sites, you might just have one contaminant group, most commonly volatile organic compounds. Other sites have different contaminant types that require different treatments. So the cartoon that you see on the slide, the groundwater is first treated for volatile organic compounds using air stripping and carbon absorption. Then the water passes to an ion exchange system to remove perchlorate, and then finally an additional system to remove other compounds such as 1,4-dioxane. And in addition, some projects may actually have other constituents that need to be treated, so that would be yet an additional treatment process. And again, the photos are examples of the infrastructure that are needed for these different processes. So in addition to being just technically challenging, when you're looking at the scale of groundwater contamination that we're dealing with, there are a lot of administrative challenges as well. It takes time to come up with the money to pay for the infrastructure that's needed, as well as to operate and maintain these systems. Often they're operating for decades, as Ray mentioned earlier. So and another issue that arises is that a lot of times the funding assistance that is available from the state and federal governments is for infrastructure, it's not for operation and maintenance, and yet the bulk of the cost to run these projects over the decades is the operation and maintenance cost, and the goal is not to completely pass that on to the consumer. In addition, it takes time to obtain the permits, for the water end use, whether it's being served as drinking water. We want to serve safe drinking water. If the project is going to be discharging to a surface water body, you need a permit for that, and also for reinjection, there's a permit associated with that. All those processes take time. In addition, this is an adjudicated basin, so you need the right to pump, and if you don't have that right, you need to be prepared to pay a fee for the volume of water that you're producing. So one of the simplest approach for many of these projects is to make sure that you're working with a party that has pumping rights in the basin. In addition, as I mentioned, there's just a lot of coordination that goes on to make these projects successful. So EPA has established 4 active pump and treat systems in the Baldwin Park Operable Unit, El Monte Operable Unit, South El Monte, and Whittier Narrows Operable Units. The remedy for the Puente Valley Operable Unit is in the design phase, and for the Area 3 Operable Unit is still in the selection process. So just to refer back to something that Ray mentioned is that, in this cleanup process, there are points in time where EPA is conferring with the public to ensure that they are accepting of the project, and so they issue fact sheets or hold public meetings to discuss the project decisions that are pending and to get their input. So in its most recent fact sheet describing the status of the cleanup activities in the San Gabriel Valley, US EPA also included information about project costs. So not surprisingly, the largest plume has the largest price tag at $500 million. That's followed by $75 million each for South El Monte and the Puente Valley operable units, and $50 million each for the El Monte and Whittier Narrows operable units. And so one thing that we would note is these are underestimated costs. They probably do not include enough for the long-term O&M since these are operating for decades. In addition, with all of these projects, you have a design and you proceed, and then something unexpected happens and you need to add another treatment process to your project. And so some of those treatments can be quite expensive. So the estimates that are shown in blue are currently being, are the projects that are currently being implemented by or paid for by the potentially responsible parties. The projects in purple either do not have responsible parties, such as the Whittier Narrows operable unit, or through EPA's settlement processes didn't come up with enough money to fully fund the project. That's the case for the South El Monte operable unit. So as Ray mentioned, when Superfund monies are used, the state is required to pay a 10% cost share for the infrastructure in the first 11 years of operation in Whittier Narrows and the South El Monte. After that, the responsibility for operational cost transfers to the state of California, and DTSC provides that cost share and ongoing operation maintenance cost on behalf of the state. So we transition to activities on a specific project, Whittier Narrows operable unit, and recall this is the unit that is at the toe of the basin where groundwater flows out into the central basin. This EPA's intent with this remedy is to intercept the plume before it migrates into the central basin and affects other water supply wells. They have installed a line of extraction wells at the toe of the plume, the darker green color on the slide. In essence, this is the keystone of all the San Gabriel Basin remedies, because if the contamination bypasses some of the other containment systems further to the north, then it should be captured here. And one thing to note is there are no contaminant source areas in this operable unit. Everything is flowing into the area from upgradient areas of the basin, from areas to the north. So the project was constructed, EPA constructed the project in 2001 and 2002, a cost of $16 million. EPA operated it from 2002 to 2013. In May 2013, it transferred to the state, and DTSC has been operating it since then. It includes 7 groundwater extraction wells, conveyance systems to get the water to the plant, the treatment plant capable of treating volatile organic compounds, and the primary end uses here, the primary end use is intended to be drinking water, and with a lesser amount going to some nearby lakes that are managed by the county. And the project is expected to operate in perpetuity for this foreseeable future. So even though the system has transferred to the state and we are managing 100% of the O&M, EPA has modifications underway to connect a new drinking water operator. Prior to the transfer to the state, the previous drinking water operator, the city of Whittier, elected not to stay with the project and stopped taking water into their distribution system in March of 2013. So the modifications that you see here are estimated to cost $8 million, of which DTSC will pay 10% on behalf of the state. They started in January 2014 and are expected to continue into 2016. And once the modifications are complete, we still need to go through the drinking water permitting process for the new operator. So in summary, we're 3 decades into the cleanup efforts in the San Gabriel Valley. and we have decades more to go to address all of the impacts. And, this is more efforts than just EPA Superfund remedies. We have a lot of site-specific cleanups ongoing, as well as the local stakeholder efforts. And when you tally up all those costs, the projected costs are more than $1 billion long-term. In addition, there's still site discovery processes going on, such as Rick was describing, so that price tag is just going to continue to increase. And these projects are also help underscore the situation with our site remediation account. The cost for the Whittier Narrows Operable unit to operate and maintain that system in this fiscal year is almost 1/6 of the orphan fund. It costs about $1.5 million a year currently to run that project. In addition, when the South El Monte Operable unit transfers to the state DTSC in 2023, it's going to take up approximately 40% of our site remediation account budget if it stays at current levels. Okay.
Thank you, Kate. This is Dot again. The complexity and the scope of that project is just mind-boggling. I've heard these figures over and over again, and yet trying to get your arms around that it's just hard to fathom. We're going to move into the next portion of our talk now, of our presentation, and this is called Returning Land to Productive Use. And I can tell you from personal experience, there is nothing more thrilling than going to a project that you've been working on and seeing that the cleanup is complete and the land that used to just lie fallow is now being used in a productive way. A couple of weeks ago, I was out on a tour with the director. A few of us were showing her around some of the Emeryville sites, and we ended up in Alameda, which used to be my project. I hadn't been there in a few years, and I got so excited. I started jumping up and down in my seat as much as you can if you're driving. I was the driver. And she looked at me and she said, "What are you so excited about?" Because we're looking at a big box store, and it was a shopping center, and I said to her, if you had seen this the way I last saw it, land, it had been cleaned up, but it hadn't been put back to reproductive use yet, and it was just barren land and signed and fenced, and it was blight. And here it was with people walking around, and there was landscaping and strollers and a Target store. It was a thrill. So what we're going to do now is have two people who are not quite there in their projects yet, but this is the path they're on. We have Supervising Engineer Fernando Amador, who's going to talk to us about the challenges of working on rail yards and some specific ones that he's working on. And followed by Fernando, it will be Imad. I stumbled over your name, I'm sorry. And Imad is going to tell us about a challenging project in Carson. He's going to share with us some of the remediation and also the proposed future for that. Fernando.
While Fernando is coming up, I'm going to introduce our Chief Counsel, Reed Sato, who had meetings he had to be in this morning, and he's joined us during the last presentation.
Okay, good morning. I'm going to discuss returning land to productive use, and specifically rail fields, cleaning up California rail fields. I'm going to present a little information about rail fields, and then I'm going to go into updating you on two local rail fields projects that the department's been involved in for many years, the Sacramento Downtown Rail Yard and the Curtis Park Rail Yard. And I noticed on the agenda that they're reversed, and my presentation talks about the Downtown Rail Yard first, so please note that. So first, rail fields. What are they? They're a sector-based subset of brownfields, resulting in a number of unused or underutilized former railroad properties, potentially contaminated in some cases. The railroad industry expanded dramatically for over 100 years from completion of the Transcontinental Railroad until they faced significant competition from automobile, trucking, and air transportation industries. And a result of that, a legacy of unused former railroad property, potentially contaminated, were left behind. Rail fields are located in rural and urban areas all across the nation, in every state. And they vary in size and complexities depending on the former usage. These rail fields offer opportunities as well as challenges. As opportunities, often they offer large parcels of land and ideal locations for community revitalization. Rails to Trails is an example of a program that turns former rural rail rights-of-ways into trails and open space, while urban rail fields are often reused for urban infill development projects. The railfield projects can be the economic engine behind public benefits that are well worth the efforts. Reuse of these sites can result in new jobs for the community, new tax revenues for the city, and often serve as catalysts for new investments into the general areas. Many rail fields also offer significant challenges. They can be heavily contaminated, especially those associated with former industrial operations. Contaminations can include asbestos, herbicides, petroleum products, solvents, metals, and a long list of contamination associated with heavy industry. These conditions can present big hurdles for reuse. Important concepts to successful reuse of rail fields are, first of all, partnering. Partnering with reuse authorities such as the city early on can ensure that the cleanup is synchronized with the planned reuse. Partnering with the department and other state and local environmental agencies establishes appropriate regulatory oversight for the selection and implementation of cleanup remedies that result in safe reuse. And partnering, of course, with all stakeholders, especially the surrounding communities, helps keep the rail cleanup projects on track. Environmental insurance has been used as a tool to overcome potential environmental liability problems in transactions by quantifying and transferring risks related to rail fields, cleanup costs, and liability from project stakeholders to insurance companies. Keeping a vision of the end use at hand during the cleanup process from the beginning helps reach a protective, timely, and feasible solution. For large rail fields cleanup projects, as well as any cleanup project, as you heard earlier on some of the earlier projects, an effective strategy is to break the project up into separate study areas based on unique features or different levels of contamination. Focus study areas can then be prioritized to respond to immediate threats or even to accommodate stages of redevelopment instead of waiting until the entire site cleanup is complete. I'll now go into discussion of the project-specific local rail fields projects that we're working on. I'll present some of the updates and also some of the strategies that I mentioned earlier and how they've been applied in these projects. First, I'll start with the Sacramento Downtown Rail Yard. It's been identified as one of the largest urban infill sites in our nation. It's 240 acres, a former locomotive manufacturing and maintenance facility, and extends north of downtown Sacramento along the Sacramento River, and is as big as the existing downtown central business district. The rail yard, this rail yard facility operated for over a century, initially as Central Pacific, then Southern Pacific, then it was acquired in the early 80s by Union Pacific. And soon after Union Pacific purchased the site, they no longer operate as an industrial facility. But when it was operating, locomotives not only were maintained, but they were actually, in fact, manufactured at the site. And several of the buildings that are now left, only a few, are not historic buildings that will actually serve as an expansion to the Sacramento Rail Yard Museum. So the 100 years of industrial operations released industrial waste streams containing primarily metals, solvents, and other petroleum-based compounds, not only to soil but to groundwater as well. So the regulatory framework that the departments and the Union Pacific are working under, we have an enforceable agreement that was entered into in 1988. It sets the terms for cleanup and terms for the responsible party to pay for the pollution and to also pay for the department's oversight. In 1994, the department was designated as lead agency for this project. Basically, this authorizes the department to have sole jurisdiction over the cleanup aspects. In this role, the department's required to coordinate closely with other state and local environmental agencies that otherwise would have jurisdiction as well. For this downtown rail yard project, Union Pacific remains responsible for the cleanup of the contamination that's there, even after sale of the property. This was facilitated by use of an insurance policy, as I mentioned earlier, to transfer some of the liabilities and risks to the insurance companies. So with the city's rail yard development specific plan established early on, cleanup consistent with and safe for the intended land use has been facilitated. This next slide is kind of busy, and I'm not intending for all of you to read it, but I just wanted to summarize that on the left, all the rows basically are indicating the different study areas that the site was broken up into. From left to right, is the cleanup process from the early investigation on the left to completion of remediation on the right. Just wanted you to see how far along we are on this project. In fact, approximately 200 acres of the 240 acre site has been cleaned up. Early on, interim measures were implemented to address the immediate threats, not only to exposures to human health, but also to protect groundwater and the environment. The next slide will show a similar progress depiction. This is the status of the soil remedy. The areas that are not red are the areas where the remedies have already been implemented for soil and completed. It represents approximately 200 acres. Also depicted here are the major study areas that the site was broken up into. As a result of the soil remedies, over 700 tons of soil have been removed to address the contamination that included asbestos, metals, solvents, fuels, and other petroleum products. And really, what's left for us to certify the 200 acres is the recording of a land use covenant that would provide the protections for exposures from the residual contamination. There'll be requirements for soil management, also requirements for vapor intrusion mitigation in certain areas of the site. And then the areas in red are where soil remedies remain to be completed. There are 3 areas. The upper red areas are called the lagoon northwest corner. There was a lagoon in that vicinity where waste stream was piped. All the liquid waste stream was in a pond and impacted significantly that area. The northwest corner was not heavily impacted with the solvent materials, but there was quite a bit of fairly inert contamination material that was used as the berm for the levee. And a remedy was selected for that area to consolidate and leave that stuff there in place and consolidate some additional materials on top and place a cover on it. The consolidation is fairly complete at this point, and we're waiting to coordinate with the city on the final design of the 5th Street extension that will go through in the vicinity of that area to finalize the cap design. The central area, the larger red area, is the central shops. That's the location where the heavy industry operations occurred. It's a significantly impacted soil and groundwater area. A remedy has been selected for soil remediation and groundwater remediation of that area and is now in the implementation phases. The very small red area to the left is the manufactured gas plant study area. It was an area that was encountered, in fact, during excavation. It was discovered that there was a manufactured gas plant that operated there, in fact, prior to the railroad coming to Sacramento. And that area is it's in the early stages of cleanup. In fact, we've completed the investigation and are now in the process of entering the remedy selection phase. The next figure is a depiction of the groundwater contamination plumes. It's broken up into 2 study areas. The upper study area in green is the lagoon groundwater plume. Its source was the lagoon pond where the waste stream was piped. And the second study area in blue is the south plume, where we have selected a remedy and in fact are in the process of implementing that. Again, I just want to remind everybody that early on interim measures were introduced to contain this contamination so that it wouldn't continue to spread. This plume currently expands approximately 1.5 miles, and it's bound by Richards Boulevard, and it extends down to North Q Street to the south. Groundwater extends off-site in the lower sand zone and gravel zone with little site contamination or groundwater contamination in the off-site shallow zone, and therefore poses no immediate threat to the existing population over the plume. The extraction system that was implemented early on continues to operate and extracts at about 400,000 gallons a day. The final remedy will expand that system to remove additional contamination. And complete groundwater cleanup will take decades, but will not preclude the development of the site. And the contamination consists of primarily volatile organic compounds and some metals. My next slide is focused to basically show what the site looked like during remediation, and the fact that during remediation, infrastructure development was accommodated. The next slide will show some of the infrastructure work that's been completed during our remediation project. I don't know if the people on the internet can see this, but as I'm progressing, I'm going to show the different study areas that, the infrastructure projects that were completed. First was 7th Street. It was the first roadway that traversed the site. That was in, I think, early 2000. There was a building abatement project to clean up asbestos and lead from inside of the historic buildings. 5th and 6th Street overpasses and roadways have been constructed. Rail Yards Boulevard that connects 5th and 6th Street to 7th Street and all the way across to what will be an extension of Burcut has been completed. And also, just a year ago or so, the city's track realignment project was accommodated. The city moved the Union Pacific tracks closer to the historic buildings, and it resulted in also opening up property so that the intermodal station could be expanded. So the next slide. DTSC will have an ongoing role at the rail yard after the remedy is certified. There'll be long-term operation and maintenance under an enforceable agreement with the responsible party. Under this agreement, there'll be financial assurance established to assure that there's money set aside to continue the operation and maintenance of the remedy. Land use covenants and institutional controls will be in place to assure that the soils are managed appropriately and the protections for vapor intrusion mitigation are incorporated into the development plans. And DTSC will also conduct 5-year reviews to reevaluate the remedies to make sure that they remain protective. My next slide starts my summary of the Curtis Park Rail Yard cleanup. This site is 94 acres, and currently the site is surrounded by established homes and Sacramento City College. For 8 decades, industrial manufacturing and maintenance of locomotives resulted in significant releases of metals, solvents, and other petroleum-based compounds to soil and groundwater. The department entered into an enforceable cleanup agreement with Union Pacific almost 25 years, or a little over 25 years ago. Again, interim remedies were focused on initially to address all the immediate threats. Union Pacific here also remains responsible even after sale of the property. Again, environmental insurance facilitated the transfer of this property. And also, here again, the city established a reuse plan early on, which again has facilitated focused cleanup and consistent with the planned reuse. And this project required extensive community involvement. All our projects require community outreach, but because this project was surrounded by an established community and was right in the middle of a well-established neighborhood, it did require quite a bit of outreach, more than, even though this was a much smaller project and less complex than the Sacramento Rail Yard, it required much more outreach. The cleanup plans were approved only after extensive outreach, which included more than 15 public meetings, 35 fact sheets, over a dozen briefings with local elected officials, neighborhood leaders, and interested community members. This outreach included more than 100 days of public review and 74 days of formal review of the draft plans. We provided well over 100 written responses to public comments. In the long run, this partnering resulted in the cleanup and plans for reuse that are compatible with the surrounding community. This is a similar the next slide is a similar summary I presented earlier on the Sacramento Rail Yard. Again, it's just to indicate here the highlights that we established focus study areas, took interim actions early on to address the immediate threats, and also to accommodate some of the infrastructure work that needed to be started early before remediation was completed. As you can see here, the green completed boxes depict the completion of work, and so we're pretty far along here. And we've, in fact, completed all the soil remediation, and in fact, redevelopment is now occurring in the site. My next slide depicts the current condition of the groundwater plume. This plume extends off-site for several blocks. Remedial measures were established early on to contain this plume. Remediation has been effective. Approximately 200 pounds of contamination have been removed through a pump and treat system. Groundwater remediation, this pumping system will continue to operate for maybe another decade or so. But this remediation won't preclude any development, and also it does not present any immediate threats to the current population over the plume. This figure also indicates that the plume has been reduced now to just the off-site tail. The upper rectangle is the corner of the Union Pacific Curtis Park site, and the plume that remains is actually disconnected now. It's only the tail end plume, it's the lower concentrations. Cleanup has been effective at removing the higher end portions of the plume. So now this is with regards to, my next slide presents a status of the soil cleanup that was completed. In early 2000, approximately 35,000 tons of slag material impacted with lead and arsenic were removed to accommodate the regional transit expansion along the leftmost portion of the site. Additional slag was also removed and completed on the Union Pacific right-of-way to facilitate their continued switching yard operation. Now, majority of the cleanup was done on the central part of the site there, which is the remaining 72 or so acres. Approximately 250,000 tons of soil impacted with metals and petroleum PAHs were removed to achieve cleanup for unrestricted land use on the majority of this area, with only a few roadway areas in the commercial zone parcel requiring a land use covenant. This final cleanup conducted at the site is consistent with land use specific plan approved by the City of Sacramento. And certification is scheduled this year, and site development is now in progress. And my last slide is basically just indicating, showing some of the current development that's been taking place. The site is planned for mixed use, mostly single-family residential, condos and apartments, and over 250,000 square foot of retail. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Imad Yamout, and I'm a supervising engineer from the Cypress office in Southern California. I'm going to talk to you today about the Dominguez Golf Course, now the Porsche Experience Center in the city of Carson. Little history about this site. The Dominguez Golf Course is part of the BKK landfill that also include Victoria Golf Course and the Goodyear Blimp. So what we did here is we agreed with the RP and separated the Dominguez Golf Course from the BKK landfill to facilitate development. This is, everybody knows, it's a class 2 landfill that contain mostly municipal solid waste in addition to liquid and industrial waste. It was closed in the 1960s. DTSC is the lead agency overseeing the remediation of the site. And we do have, or we approved a remedial action plan in 2012. Now, the previous condition of the site, as you can see, that's the Dominguez Golf Course, and we have the 64-unit apartment complex. That is before we started with clearing and site demolition. The site is approximately 53 acres, and this is just the Dominguez Golf Course. We started with the site demolition and implementation of our response action, and the remedial objectives that we included in our RAP included the elimination of risk exposure to public, to landfill waste, prevent surface water from entering the waste prism, capture, control, and treat landfill gas, capture, control, and treat contaminated groundwater. That's going to be done in conjunction with the BKK groundwater remediation. A summary of our remedial system that we implemented at the site. We have a site-wide gas removal and treatment system. We capped the site. And also, again, we're going to install a groundwater control system, when we going to deal with the BKK groundwater remediation. Then we're going to go into long-term operation and maintenance of these remedial systems. In addition to that, we have a building protection system, and all the features and structures going to be built on piles. That's going to mitigate, the differential landfill settlements, at the site. Now, what is the gas control? We're going to have we built a gas control over the entire site that included horizontal wells under buildings, in addition to horizontal wells across the sites. Then we had vertical wells at the perimeter. All these wells going to be plumbed into a gas treatment system that's going to be automated and operational 24/7. Though this is a picture of the wells that we are using, or the piping that we are using, and laying into the trenches. Those trenches went all over, the site. We're going to cap the site, and we used a clay liner in addition to a geosynthetic clay liner. Those were all over the landfill, except for the area of the building. For the area of the building, we use a different cap. We use a linear low-density polyethylene cap, which is very strong, flexible, and impermeable. But for the parking areas and the open areas, we use clay and geosynthetic clay liner. This slide shows you how we are basically installing the geosynthetic clay liner. We wanted to make sure that whatever response action we're doing is protective. So we have multiple layers of protection. We have an active landfill gas collection and treatment system. Then we have our cap, the clay and geosynthetic cap. Under the building, we have the linear low-density polyethylene liner. Then we end up with a passive venting system. And below the slab, also, we have a landfill gas detection system. Then we have a secondary membrane also attached to the slab. Then at the end, we have our building ventilation system. So we built multiple layers of protection just to make sure that our development is going to be safe. So here you go. We work into integrating our environmental response action with the development of the site. Porsche Experience Center. And the overall project cost, including remediation, is approximately $50 million. This project is going to develop up 290 jobs in the short and long term. It is expected that it will generate $22 million a year. And we believe that this is an innovative use of a former landfill, like a large-scale driver skill and training center. This is, like I said, all buildings going to be built on piles. So the slide shows the piles, and here you go. This is the Porsche man. Okay.
Thank you, Imad and Fernando. And both of these projects are going to make such a difference in the community. Try and imagine coming back in a few years and seeing the rail yard, the way it's going to be, and going to this Porsche Experience facility is going to be such a boon for Carson. So these are exciting consequences to the work that we do. This brings us to the final portion of our cleanup program. We have two people to talk to you about some specific sites that we know you're interested in. Branch Chief Mark Malinowski is going to talk about the challenges and complications working with the Santa Susana Field Laboratory. And after Mark is finished, then Supervisor Sue Patel is going to be talking about the Exide project, which she's providing leadership for. And with that, Mark.
Thank you, Dot. Appreciate it. I am here to give a short summary on the Santa Susana Field Lab project. The Santa Susana Field Lab was a former rocket engine testing facility and also did nuclear energy research. In 1959, at one of the reactors, there was an accident at the sodium reactor experiment, but there's also other activities that happen on that site, industrial, that I'll be talking a little bit more about as we move forward. This is a roadmap basically to give a location of Santa Susana Field Lab. It's located approximately 30 miles away from downtown Los Angeles, so that'd be to the lower right-hand corner of the map. And Simi Valley is the closest, is one of the close cities to the north of the Santa Susana Field Lab project. There are three responsible parties that are responsible for doing the investigation and the cleanup on Santa Susana. The Boeing Company, and DTSC has a 2007 consent order that oversees or requires the investigation and the cleanup of that portion of their cleanup. NASA, we have an administrative order on consent. It was signed in 2010 for the cleanup. And for Department of Energy, we also have a 2010 administrative order on consent. Santa Susana is approximately 2,850 acres. It's a very large site, heavily industrialized, but it's also a very complex topography. And I should mention that with that first picture, but there's bedrock outcroppings. And so it's not just a standard flat site that has a lot of alluvium. There's bedrock, it's very rugged. And that really does have an impact on how we approach this site. And so I wanted to make sure that that was mentioned. But again, as I said, we've got the three responsible parties, Boeing, NASA, and DOE. And we've broken this area up, as you've heard Fernando talk about. We take these larger projects and we break them into more manageable areas so we can actually be more effective about how to go about the cleanup and identify the areas that do require cleanup. Santa Susana has property that is owned by the federal government. So on this figure, you'll see Area 2, this large area almost in the middle of the site, and a small little box up here that says NASA. That's about a 41-acre portion of property. Those two properties are owned by the federal government. NASA administers or is the responsible government agency for overseeing the cleanup for that property, but that's federally owned property. The remaining portion of Santa Susana is owned by the Boeing Company. The Department of Energy, however, has responsibility for the soils cleanup for what we call Area 4 on the far left-hand side of the slide, and the two areas identified as buffer that are just to the upper part of Area 4. We call that the northern buffer zone. So Department of Energy has responsibility for the soil cleanup for Area 4 and for the northern buffer zones. Boeing has responsibility for their sites in Area 1 and for their sites in Area 3, and then NASA has responsibilities for the cleanup for Area 2 and for the LOX area. DTSC is committed to ensure that the cleanups are done with or under the orders that apply to each of the responsible parties. DTSC is going to implement the cleanup for DOE following the administrative orders on consent, the same way that we're going to do that for NASA, the same way we are going to make Boeing do the cleanup pursuant to the 2007 consent order. As I said, it's a very complex project, and this slide gives an idea of the different regulatory agencies that are involved. DTSC, through these orders, is the lead cleanup agency overseeing the investigation and cleanup. But starting on the left of this slide, the Clean Water Act is implemented by the Los Angeles Regional Water Quality Control Board. So we work very closely with them. Atomic Energy Act has some application for the radionuclides that are out there. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the California Department of Public Health, their radiation branch, are part of that. We also have to work with DOE. Clean Air Act, the Ventura County Air Pollution Control District is also part of what we have to deal with. As we are working to generate or doing this work, we have to pay attention to how do we minimize dust, and if we have to do any type of thermal treatment to destroy some of the chemicals that are out there, we have to pay attention to what type of emissions. And so that is the coordination that we have to do with that Air Pollution Control District. And then again, as I said, DTSC is the lead state agency overseeing the cleanup. This slide is a slightly different slide than what Ray had about the process. And one of the things that I'm most proud about, and I'm very proud of the 18 to 20 staff people that we have working on this project. It really is a powerful group of people that we have working this. And I can't tell you how excited we are because we're coming to the end of this first phase, that facility investigation. And I think as Dot identified, there's probably nothing more satisfying than getting through a very large-scale project because you've been working on it year after year after year, and you wonder, when are you going to get to the end? We're getting to a point, a very big milestone, and that is completion of the investigation work phase. And that's that box on the far left. This really tells us what is the extent of the contamination? How far out does it go? How deep is it? And how can we best deal with that? The second step that we are just getting ready to move into this year and in the next couple of years is that evaluation of cleanup alternatives and identifying and proposing to the public cleanup alternatives, how we're going to go about getting the cleanup done. Then it's going to be the implementation phase. Throughout our entire process, we've been really working strongly with the community to get them involved, and we've done this probably even more so than any other site I've worked on, to bring the public in as we're working on the investigations. As we were developing work plans for sampling, there were public meetings with the community, with the responsible parties, and with DTSC to say, here's where we're sampling, here's what we're sampling for, we want your input. So we've really strived, to really get out and to get the public involved. And so we will continue that public involvement process as we move through, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward into the next slides. It will also tie to our California Environmental Quality Act, our CEQA process, and I'll talk about the California Environmental Quality Act in just a few slides. So I'm going to go through slides by each of the responsible parties. So the first I'm going to start with is Department of Energy, Area 4, Borough Flats. DOE had approximately 200 structures on the Area 4 portions of the property during their operations. And so they conducted their operations from about the mid-50s, early 50s through 2000. Through 1990. And so what they did in their operations, they did have, like I said, they had the sodium reactor experiment that had a release of radionuclides. So there's a release of radionuclides we have to deal with, but there was also chemicals. And you'll see from the maps that I'm going to show that there's actually probably more chemical contamination than there is radiological contamination. Whoop. Go that way. So DOE has completed all of their field investigation for both the chemical investigations and for the radionuclide work. They are currently undergoing their groundwater source investigation, so we're working with them to develop the work plans to get that work done and to get groundwater understood. They have worked to complete their soil treatability studies, and we should be seeing reports coming in this year for that. And then their demolition program, so they have structures within Area 4. That demolition cannot occur until DOE has completed their NEPA process, and we have our California Environmental Quality Act process in place as well. So this map shows the extent of the radionuclide or the radiological cleanup that has to be done at the site. The majority of the radionuclide contamination was found around the operational areas or the building areas. This work was done by the US EPA and was completed in 2012. And so these are going to be areas that basically under the administrative orders on consent that we are committed to implementing are going to be cleaned up. And so for this work here, you can see what the extent is. Also notice that there's drainages that go off to the north or off to the upper left-hand portion of the slide. So the drainages, there are some drainages that go off, but there are no radionuclides that are in those drainages. Go to the next slide. And this figure shows the extent of the chemical contamination of the site. Here you have some chemicals that are in the drainages that are leaving the site. However, we've evaluated the potential risk for those, and we do not find that those levels would pose any risk to the people who may be in that area. But those still have to be cleaned up, and we commit to cleaning those up under the administrative orders on consent. NASA had rocket engine testing facilities at the site. They tested the Saturn V booster rockets out at the site, and so this site is steeped with historic tradition in rocket testing and about the space program that the United States had. This shows two of the large standing test stand areas that they had, and the chemicals that they used after they would run their engine tests, they would flush them with solvents. And so the solvents would come down and from these areas after and be flushed down into the soil and into the groundwater. And so you had those types of operations. But you also had industrial activities for other types of contaminants. So we have metals, solvents, petroleum, hydrocarbons, many of the same types of things that you heard Fernando talking about that you had at the rail yards, very similar type of contamination that we have at the San Susana Field Lab. So NASA is just wrapping up their field work or has completed their field work. They are putting their field investigation reports together. We should anticipate getting those middle of this year, 2015. They are currently working to fill their groundwater, what we call data gaps, trying to make sure we know where the extent of the groundwater contamination is and how it flows. So they're just completing that work. They have done also other studies to try and figure out how to best take care of the contamination that they have to deal with. This figure shows the extent of the NASA chemical contamination, and you'll notice that doesn't necessarily cover as big of an area as the DOE chemical map. And a lot of that has to do with, as I said, this rugged topography. There's a lot of rock outcropping that occurs on the NASA portions of the property. And so that does, in some sense, restrict what has to be cleaned up and what areas actually were contaminated by the activities. Again, our intent is that NASA will do the cleanup pursuant to the administrative orders on consent. The Boeing Company is the third responsible party out at the site. This particular picture is a dust picture that shows what they call the bowl. This was actually one of the first engine test facilities that was installed at Santa Susana Field Lab. And the test stand to the far left of the picture that is lit up right to the left of the one that has the engine exhaust coming out of it was actually one of the first test stands that was designed under Dr. Werner von Braun, for the space program. So again, a lot of history out at this site. Boeing and the predecessor companies that Boeing acquired had a lot of operations that obviously went on out here, a lot of industrial activities. Again, the same types of contaminants that we see for NASA, the chemicals, the chlorinated solvents, the things that were used as degreasers or cleaning agents, metals, petroleum hydrocarbons, dioxin, those types of things. Boeing is currently working to complete their field work, so their field work should be completed in 2015. We would anticipate that. And they are taking theirs in chunks, so pieces at a time, because it is so large. And so as they complete their sections, we'll get these individual reports back and be reviewing those. So it's almost like a sequencing, and it actually, again, helps us manage our resources rather than you get all the reports at one time. So it really does help us plan our resources and get to solutions in a much more effective time approach. Their groundwater investigations are almost complete. They are probably furthest ahead on completing their groundwater investigations, more so than DOE and NASA at this point. They have conducted some groundwater treatability studies. I'll be talking about treatability studies in just a second. This slide is actually one of my favorite slides because it shows the component test lab. So this is one of the facilities that was at Santa Susana, and it was in the process of being demolished when I first started working on Santa Susana Field Lab in 2010. And so I never saw it as it is in the before picture, but I saw pieces of it. And it's very telling that, okay, so this is how we can see the progression going to go as we move forward with the cleanup. And so they did the demolition, so there you have the middle shot right after it was done. They put in their best management practices to prevent erosion, make sure they don't have surface runoff. And then in 2014, how green is my valley kind of thing. So from that standpoint, now the one thing I do want to mention though is that there's still contaminants out here. Even though this looks like a bucolic scene, there's still contamination that has to be cleaned up out here. And so when we required the sampling, we required the locations be put in and evaluated and basically with measurement systems, global positioning systems, so we can go back to the same locations and find where those locations are. Much like a GPS on your car tells you where you are, we can do the same thing with our sampling locations. So we know where to sample, where to clean up. Much like the other figures that I showed for DOE and for NASA, this shows the extent of the Boeing soil characterization that will require cleanup under the consent order that we have with them. I'm going to shift gears now to a site-wide perspective and go back to things that all of the responsible parties are working on. And so they all are working on treatability studies. That is, how can we work to get the cleanup of the contamination taken care of without having to truck the soils off the site or get the soils off the site? And so there are ways that we have that can be applied to do that. And so this is a list of some of those, and they work for both soils and groundwater. The tough question we have with the low cleanup levels that we have for Department of Energy and for NASA under those administrative orders on consent, some of these may not be able to get as low as we would like for them to get. And so those are things that we have to deal with. We're going to continue to push and see how we can do and improve that and to get to that end point. But there are also things like in situ chemical oxidation that are occurring or that are going on right now with groundwater that Boeing has tried. And what that means is basically, it means we don't have to pump the groundwater up and treat it and then re-inject it or put it off the surface water. It means there's the degradation that can happen of the chemicals while the groundwater is still in place. And so basically it's a good way for us to reduce the environmental footprint, if you will, of having to pump that water up and having to treat it and then re-inject it and deal with it. Site-wide groundwater. All three of the responsible parties, Boeing, DOE, and NASA, are responsible for different portions of the groundwater and the groundwater contamination that they have out there. They provided to DTSC a remedial investigation report. DTSC identified data gaps and have directed the responsible parties to fill those data gaps, to determine the extent of the contamination, and to evaluate the faults and seeps. So sometimes faults can act as conduits for contamination. Sometimes those faults act to prevent the migration of contamination. So those are all things that we need to make sure are well understood out here. The other thing that I'm very anxious or happy about is that the groundwater interim measures, so places where we have the highest groundwater contamination, operating wells from the highest contaminated areas to get those areas at least treatment going on those. We anticipate that starting up in the fall of 2015. We do have a long-term quarterly groundwater monitoring program going on at the site. We have over 300 different groundwater monitoring points that are evaluated to ensure we know where the chemical contamination is in the groundwater. And so this figure does show the extent of the groundwater contamination. This is using trichloroethylene, or TCE, which is the common cleaning solvent. And this one actually kind of shows the extent of the groundwater plumes that we're aware of at Santa Susana Field Lab. There is a portion on the far northeast corner on the upper right-hand picture of this slide. There is a portion of a groundwater plume that does go off the site. There are no public drinking water wells that are impacted, and we do have monitoring wells, a whole series of monitoring wells surrounding that, so we can make sure that that plume is not moving or migrating, and that we can monitor that. So that is part of our responsibilities, and that we work with our staff and with the responsible parties to make sure that the sampling is adequate to ensure that that monitoring works. On this slide, also, I don't show any surface water issues, but as I mentioned earlier, the Regional Water Quality Control Board has responsibility for surface water runoff, and we work very closely with the Water Board for surface water issues. For California Environmental Quality Act, we are in the process of developing a environmental impact report compliant with CEQA. CEQA is a state statute that requires, basically, whenever a state agency is making a discretionary decision, as we are about the cleanups out here, we have to address the potential environmental impacts and how we're going to mitigate those impacts. And so to that end, it is our responsibility to develop this environmental impact report that doesn't just address just the DOE or just the NASA or just the Boeing. We need to deal with all three of those responsible parties. We need to look at the potential cumulative impacts of that cleanup. And so we will be addressing the cleanup actions for all the responsible parties and looking at different routes and conveyance systems for that. And we have to look at the cultural and potential biological impacts. So when we're doing cleanup, we need to pay attention to sensitive species, things like that. The cultural resources, there are Native American artifacts and significant Native American areas on the site that we need to be aware of, and we are working with the Native American councils in regard to that. We have had several meetings. We had our scoping meeting back in 2013. We've had transportation feasibility meetings in 2014, and we will continue to do outreach to the community as we can under the CEQA requirements to get community input. We expect the draft EIR to be available in 2015, fall 2015. So what's next? As I said, I think this is a real exciting time. The next 6 months is going to be very jam-packed for the staff that are working on this, because we are getting the investigations complete. We're working on the treatability studies, seeing that information, and we're going to start drafting these proposed cleanup decision documents, and then we'll be going out to the public with those. Groundwater, as I said, the groundwater interim measures, we're going to be able to get that groundwater interim measures system up and operational at the end of this year. And so with all these investigations, the groundwater investigations, getting those complete, it's a very jam-packed next 6 months that we have going on, and even the next year as we move forward. For the community outreach, one of the other things that occurs is that the responsible parties have technical roundtable meetings with the community. DTSC does get involved with those. The next one that's coming up is Boeing is having a soil and groundwater treatability study public meeting. That's going to be held at the DTSC Chatsworth office on May 19th from 6:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. And then DTSC's own community outreach. We have on the DTSC website a Santa Susana Field Lab link that has a list of a lot of the activities, all the documents that have been done, many of the documents that have been done to date. We provide monthly updates and post those to the website as well of what happened in the last month, what do we see coming up in the next month. We also have a calendar of events, places for people to go so they can see what meetings are upcoming. We hold 2 public meetings every year. The next one is coming up in less than 2 weeks, April 28th. It's going to be held at Simi Valley High School and will be from 6 to 9 p.m. So we would invite the public to come to that open house and hear a presentation of the status of the Santa Susana Field Lab cleanup. And then we have breakout sessions where they can talk to the DTSC project managers on these individual areas, the DOE, the Boeing, and the NASA projects, talk more about groundwater. They can get their specific questions answered at that point. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sue Patel for Exide. Barbara, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mark. Before we transition to Sue's presentation, I just had one clarification, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but recognizing that it is a very challenging site and there are always going to be technical difficulties that we encounter in the cleanup, I want to be clear that we're absolutely committed to implementing and enforcing the cleanup requirements in the administrative orders on consent for the NASA and DOE portions of the site, and that we're also going to ensure that the Boeing portion of the site is cleaned up as needed to protect public health and the environment, and that we will require whatever measures are necessary to accomplish this. That's correct, isn't it?
That's absolutely correct, and that is what that is our goal, that is our path, and that's what we've been doing.
Excellent, thank you.
I'm Sue Patel, lead project manager for closure and cleanup of Exide facility located in the city of Vernon. This facility, as we heard from Director Lee earlier, is now closing. I'm here to provide a brief update on the residential cleanup that's occurring in the neighborhood of the Exide facility. I'll start with a little bit of a background. The Exide Technologies is one of the world's largest lead-acid battery recycling and manufacturing companies. The Exide facility, located at 2700 Indiana Street in the city of Vernon, is in a heavy industrial zone. Immediate vicinity includes Santa Fe Railroad Yards and Union Pacific, with a major rail spur that goes through the industrial zone. There are 2 major freeways nearby, Interstate 5 and 710. Los Angeles River is to the south of the facility. Nearest residents are approximately a mile or less than a mile to the north as well as to the south of the facility. This facility has been in operation since 1922. In 2000, Exide took over this facility as a secondary lead smelter that recovers lead from recycled automotive batteries. The operations at this facility have resulted in contamination of the soils beneath. It has fouled groundwater and contaminated homes and yards in the communities near the facility with emissions from the Exide. Exide was operating at this facility under an interim status document with a Part B hazardous waste permit application pending with DTSC, was operating. Again, this facility is now closing. So here's a chronology of recent events. On February 26, 2015, Department informed Exide of their intent to deny the Part B permit application and proceeded to work on a stipulation and order which was issued to Exide on March 12, 2015. The March 2015 order amended the November 2014 order, and it required Exide to commence with safe closure of the Vernon facility, to expedite funding of the trust funds for closure and cleanup, and set aside additional funds for residential cleanup. Earlier this year, Exide filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy to emerge as a reorganized company, and on March 27, bankruptcy courts approved their reorganization plan. On April 9, DTSC hosted a community meeting. This was well attended with more than 200 attendees. The attendees included residents, stakeholders and community groups, co-regulators, South Coast Air Quality Management District, Los Angeles County Department of Public Health, City of Vernon, and elected officials. At this meeting, DTSC presented an overview of the closure and cleanup process and pointed out public participation opportunities for stakeholder input. DTSC reiterated its commitment to work in collaboration with the co-regulators to ensure that with DTSC oversight, cleanup and closure will be conducted safely and in compliance with DTSC standards that are protective of human health and the environment. DTSC also announced that moving forward, we will form a Exide advisory committee that will include DTSC, our co-regulators, the residents, and interested stakeholders, as well as members, the elected officials. We have since then set up an application process on our website, and last I checked, there was one application already. We also announced our intent to retain a technical advisor for the community to help them understand our cleanup and closure process. As you've been listening to the last 2 hours, our cleanup processes are complicated, very involved. So we're retaining a technical advisor for the community that will help them understand these documents, these decisions, and the process. Going forward, we are expecting, one more point. Since their approval by the bankruptcy court, we have received a notice of intent to close from Exide on April 6th. And we are expecting a closure plan from Exide by May 15th of this year. Closure is envisioned to be a phased process. The first phase will be decontamination and deconstruction of equipment and structures at the facility. Once the phase 1 is complete, second phase will begin with subsurface sampling and to characterize the contamination, followed by cleanup. DTSC is currently oversees cleanup, investigation and cleanup on site as well as off site. And cleanup is also a three-pronged approach: residential cleanup, non-residential off-site cleanup, and on-site cleanup. Today we will focus on the residential cleanup. In November 2014, DTSC approved an interim measures work plan for emergency cleanup prepared in accordance with the February 2002 Corrective Action Consent Order. The interim measures work plan describes what EXCITE is required to do to clean up soils at residential yards where high levels of lead were found. These actions include removal of contaminated soil from yards, dust control and air monitoring while removal is occurring, and once the contaminated soils are removed, properties will be restored to their original condition and interior cleaning of the homes will be completed. Relocation during cleanup is offered and cleanup is at no cost to the property owners. So in fall of 2013, EXCITE was DTSC required EXCITE to conduct soil sampling in parts of Boyle Heights. That's where I want to be. In parts of Boyle Heights and East Los Angeles, which is, am I going the right way? Yes, here. Parts of Boyle Heights and East Los Angeles, which is referred to as the Northern Assessment Area, and in the city of Maywood, which is represented here by the green box, shaded box in the south, and it's referred to as the Southern Assessment Area. These areas are within a 3-mile radius of EXCITE, and they were selected based on the South Coast Air Monitor. They were identified by South Coast Air Quality Management District as being areas most likely to be impacted by EXCITE's emissions. Cleanup of lead contaminated residential yards in these two areas has begun under DTSC oversight. Since then, we have expanded our soil sampling effort, which is presented here with the bold black line. These are referred to as the Northern Expanded Area and the Southern Expanded Area. We have soil sample results from the expanded area, and we are going to have a meeting on May 6th to share the results of our analysis with the property owners. So we'll continue with what we are doing with the assessment areas for now. DTSC began work by contacting property owners. We started in the week of November 10, and we wrote letters, we knocked on doors, we left materials, we made appointments. We explained to them what we had tested, what we found, what needed to be done, how it would be done, and what were their choices, and scheduled the removal work. So each week, we put this chart, we update this chart. This is a pie chart that is on our website, and I think we can read better than you can read. I can read on my own paper. Between the northern and the southern assessment areas, there's 217 total properties, residential properties. Out of these 217 properties, we have cleaned up 65 properties. 3 properties do not need cleanup because the soil lead levels were below 80 parts per million, which is our cleanup level for the assessment areas. And we have 55 untested properties. We have been in the process of writing a letter to these property owners that we haven't tested to remind them of their responsibility for their renters, because some of them are rental properties, and we are reminding them of their liability to the department. The properties that are in these northern and southern assessment areas, so I have covered the cleanup complete. There are 3 properties that do not need cleanup, and then there's 55 untested properties. So now I'm going to this side of the pie chart. We have tested 162 properties. We have results for 159, and we are waiting on test results for 3 properties. The properties were prioritized into 3 priorities. Priority 1 is where the soil lead soil lead concentration was over 1,000 parts per million. Priority 2 is where the soil concentration of lead was between 400 parts per million and 999 parts per million. And priority 3 is where soil concentrations of lead were between 80 parts per million and 399 parts per million. So this bottom part of the pie chart shows that we have 11 properties in priority 1 that have not been cleaned up, but we have cleaned up 23. 25 priority 2 properties have not been cleaned up, but we have cleaned up 40 properties. And 55 property 3s are not cleaned up, but we have 2 that we have cleaned up. To date, 3,593.21 tons of soil has been removed. This update was from yesterday, and this will be updated again next week. And we also have our public participation specialist contact information. She's bilingual, very dedicated professional. For anybody that lives in that area and has any questions, to contact them. These are pictures of properties that are in the area. The top picture shows you a work in progress, and the bottom picture is of a property that has been restored. Not the same property. We have contacted, as I mentioned earlier, we have contacted the 55 untested properties. We are in the process of writing yet another letter to remind them of their liabilities. And every property owner who lives in the assessment area is requested to have their yard sampled by contacting DTSC. I can rattle off the numbers, but the numbers are on our website. This number is 1-844-225-3887. And DTSC has also been encouraging residents to take advantage of the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health blood lead testing program by calling 1-844-888-2290. So now the how part. Funding of the residential cleanup. November 2014 enforcement order required Exide to set up a trust fund of $9 million for residential cleanup. They have deposited $3 million in this trust fund as of November 21 of last year. $3 million are to be deposited this month when they have their reorganization plan effective date, and 1.5 million will be deposited on the first anniversary of that reorganization plan, so April 2016, and the rest, the remaining 1.5 million, to be deposited in April 2017. That'll be their second anniversary of the reorganization plan. In addition, the March 2015 amendment order requested Exide to set aside additional $5 million for residential cleanup outside of the assessment areas. As Mark mentioned, we have a website for Exide. Also, our website chronicles all of the information on Exide project. We have all the documents submitted by Exide, our correspondence, orders issued, status reports, all of the above. There is an electronic list subscription whereby subscribers get any new news and information from DTSC sent to their mailbox. We generate a monthly status report which is sent to all stakeholders. And as mentioned earlier, DTSC is moving forward with forming a Exide advisory committee that will meet regularly, and it will include all interested parties, residents, community groups, DTSC, co-regulators, all of the above. And we will continue to share information via our website, provide project status on a monthly basis with the community, and also continue to work with the stakeholders and co-regulators as we move forward. I too, like Mark, have a team that works on this, and I have every confidence that we will continue to engage the community and work with our co-regulators to achieve what we have set out to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Just a couple of comments from me on the status of the Exide project. It's everything has sort of happened fairly recently, and things are evolving. I did want to just point out that Exide originally filed for bankruptcy in 2013, and their bankruptcy case has been moving through the courts since then. They emerged from bankruptcy in March of this year under Chapter 11. We are still receiving applications from people interested in participating in the advisory group for the Exide closure and cleanup. We've got 3 applications in. That's a recently updated number, which is really encouraging, and we're hoping we see more. I'm excited about being able to provide a technical advisor for the community to help them not only understand the process, but also to make sure that they can participate effectively in the decision-making process around the closure and the cleanup and the oversight of those activities. So we want this to be a very engaged and participatory effort going forward, and providing the technical advisor we're hoping will help us to meet that goal. We are really committed to making sure that the community gets cleaned up. I was asked a question at the public meeting we held on April 9th about the testing done of the residential properties, and at that time I incorrectly answered that we had tested all properties, and I was focused on the fact that we are committed to testing all of the properties. We haven't secured agreements to test them all yet, and it's an important distinction, and we understand that there are still properties out there that need to be tested, but the lack of testing on those properties isn't a result of our lack of attention to them. We are working very hard to secure consent from the property owners so that we can go on site and do the testing and get the remediation underway. And I want to make sure that everyone understands that. And then I could be wrong. I think the payment for the additional $5 million that we secured for the residential cleanup comes in 2019. I will double check on that number, but I do think it's 2019. So with that, we are now going to entertain questions from the public. We have Doug Leone, one of our staff members from our IT group, is going to be reading questions that come in over the internet or Twitter, but we're going to go first to any questions that we have speaker cards from in the room. So I'm going to turn it over to Jim Markson, who is leads up our Community Affairs Office, to help direct questions from the audience or to Doug. So Jim, thank you.
Thanks, Director Lee. We did not get any speaker cards here in the room. We did get 3 questions from Twitter. If it's okay, I'll go ahead and we'll get those questions underway. The first was on SPGIT. So Doug, could you come up and read the first question we received?
The first question is from Happy Helger to hashtag AskDTSC, and it's on the SPGIT tool. SPGIT seems like a great tool, but how fast will it help identify water contamination, especially during California's drought?
Okay, I'm going to ask Rick to come up and respond to that question. Rick Fears, thank you.
So first of all, it's a good question, and I have a good answer. So my management's going to be happy, and I think everybody will be happy. The answer is immediately. We developed SPGIT about 2.5, 3 years ago, and we have been implementing it as quickly and as efficiently as possible in the department. To help us do that, we built a team of 6 GIS geologists who are also hydrogeology folks who understand groundwater flow, fate, and transport. So that team's been working with the US EPA on our grant for them. We have, we've identified a carbon tetrachloride discovery project that runs in the San Joaquin Valley. We've used it to address a backlog of 188 sites that the US EPA had on backlog. And what we're looking for is that link between groundwater and those sites and facilities. So we use other data in association with that to do that. We also have a San Luis Obispo discovery project. And you guys have seen the work that we presented here for the Central Basin in Los Angeles. Part of that groundwater convening work group there is to look at the potential for loss of wells and storage capacity within their aquifers. So those things are being addressed currently. In addition to that, we're working with the Regional Water Quality Control Board and the state water boards, and we've identified 3 SPGIT areas in LA for them to work on, where they came to me and requested that information. I said, here you go. We're using it to look at our formerly used defense facilities. We identified sites to prioritize within those. We use it ongoing to address our current sites. So for Exide facility, for instance, there's a groundwater component to the data there, and we use the SPGIT to help us assess that and other data to put other information on the map regarding other sites. So I hope that answers your question. We are diligently and hard working at moving this process forward because we see it as an important role into how DTSC can really focus our work to clean up the worst sites as fast as we can.
If I might add, Rick he mentioned again, Stuart Black, Deputy Director for the Cleanup Program. Rick Fears has been working diligently, as he mentioned, with the State Water Resources Control Board, but he also has water purveyors and water agencies all up and down the state. Very excited about the work that's going on here. So we're really starting to see a lot of movement and teamwork that's happening between the agencies that I think is going to it's going to be very beneficial in both protection and cleanup of our groundwater resources.
All right,
Second
Doug.
question's also from Twitter. It's on the subject of the Santa Susana Field Lab.
From @Chameleon75 to hashtag AskDTSC, who is in charge of cleaning up the huge buffer site at the southern edge of Santa Susana cleanup site?
Mark, can you please respond to that question?
Yes, the southern buffer zone is owned by the Boeing company, so they would have responsibility if cleanup was required. There were no operations within that portion of the southern buffer zone, however. With that said, we have required sampling in the southern buffer zone. So when we go into these, we don't just say, oh, the only operations were over here where there's buildings or things like that. We do take a larger perspective of it, and so we do look for areas where there may have been soils disposed of or put or other types of things. So we have had sampling that has gone down into the southern buffer zone, and where we found actions that had to be required, we took those actions. But Boeing is responsible for the southern buffer zone.
Thank you.
The third and final question, Doug will read, is on Exide.
From @Scott A. Petty to #AskDTSC, what will be the impact to community health once the Exide facility is torn down?
Well, Sue Patel is coming up to provide additional background on this. I will say that the department is completely committed to ensuring that the closure of the facility and the the closure of the facility is done in a manner so that no additional contamination is created off-site, and that the area is cleaned up so that any contamination resulting from Exide's operations doesn't present an ongoing risk to public health. But Sue, if you want to provide any additional information, please do.
I was just going to add that we would work with, we're working with LA County Public Health as well, so we are not the only ones watching out for public health. They are the experts, and they're with us, so thank you.
And that concludes the questions that we've received from the public during this public comment period. I would just like to thank everybody for coming here who had traveled to the meeting, and all of the folks who have participated online while we've gone through a discussion of our cleanup program. There are a lot of opportunities for you to interact with us around specific cleanup sites, but this is an opportunity for us to talk more broadly about the program's goals and what we're doing to try to make the program more effective and more responsive to your needs. The staff in the cleanup program are really committed to returning contaminated sites to uses for the public that benefit the public, and I am impressed every time I go out and meet with them in our regional offices and hear about the work that they're doing. So I want to thank them also for coming here to share some of their expertise and their passion with you. And I look forward to future opportunities for us to talk not only about cleanup, but about other programs that the department is responsible for. We will be having another public meeting in the next 3 or 4 months, and we'll provide you with information about that as it approaches. At this point in time, my hope is that we will be able to focus at that meeting on our enforcement program, and look forward again to the opportunity to work with you all going forward. Thank you.